Hello, everyone. Hello. So, I am Xaviera Page. I am the owner of Write Your Page with Page, which is the parent LLC of the English StudyHER. So, first, I kind of just want to introduce to you guys this podcast, what it is, and what it's going to be about. So, it's basically the study of women literature. It's really for my English nerds out there, or even my people who are trying to jump into literature, but kind of want to go slow or want to hear the books and break it down. So, for each podcast, I'm going to read one poem and I'm going to read one story. I'm going to break the poem down from my perspective, what I think about it. And if you guys have your own perspectives, you can feel completely free to leave it in the comments. If you have a different opinion than me, you can feel completely free to leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm just going to give you guys a little insight into who I am before we get started, just so you're a little bit familiar with your host. As I said, my name is Xaviera Page. I go by Page, and I am in my master's program at Northwestern University, getting my MA in English with a focus in creative writing. This is my first time doing a podcast, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate about English. I love reading, I love writing, and I especially love women literature, so I'm hoping that I can meet some new people through this who also loves it just as much as I do. So if you're listening to this, you're either on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, which is completely cool. However, if you are a visual learner like me, in my Instagram bio, I have provided a link to YouTube, which does have different visuals and pictures of the authors, the stories, the time. That way you can get a better understanding. All of that is on my Instagram page, which is Write Your Page with Page, and it's spelled Write, W-R-I-T-E, Your, Y-O-U-R, Page, P-A-G-E, .WPAIGE. That is Write Your Page with Page. So let's go ahead and jump into our first author and our first poem. The poem that we're starting off with for this month is A Woman Speaks by Audre Lorde. So before we jump into this poem, I want to give you guys a quick background on who Audre Lorde is and how, if interested, you can go about learning some more about her, because she is honestly a spectacular woman who was ahead of her time. Actually talking about Audre Lorde, we can actually talk about how she described herself, because she's done that. She actually says that she sees herself as Black, lesbian, mother, and poet. And if those aren't some amazing and strong things to call yourself, then I don't know what is. Mind you, this is all at a time where people did not really step out into themselves and were who they were as proudly. And not because they didn't want to, but more so because of the political climate of the times back then. And it just simply wasn't accepted as it is more so today. So that's why when I say she was ahead of her time, I talk about her kind of being a pioneer and saying, I'm Black, I'm lesbian, I am a poet, I am a mother, I am all of these things that usually wouldn't go together. I am that. And you cannot put me in a box. And I love that. It kind of reminds me of one of my favorite Nicki Minaj songs, Fly, with Rihanna, where she says, everybody always tries to box me in, suffocating every time. It locks me in. I find myself, even in today's world, sometimes feeling boxed in. Well, Paige, you want to be a professor, so you need to dress a certain way, you need to look a certain way, you need to cover your tattoos, you want to be a writer, you need to look a little artsy. Sometimes we fall into these stereotypes of, you can't look like this and you can't act like that. I love to get dressed. I'm a very girly girl. I love to post on Instagram. I like to go to parties. I like to have fun. And so it's like, can you do that and still love English and still come across as deep? Have you guys ever felt as though you were boxed in? Then please feel free to comment and let me know, because I feel as though a lot of us go through that. So I want to get back to Audre and her background. She was born to West Indian parents in New York City. She attended Catholic school, and she had her first poem published in 17 magazine while she was still attending high school. Wow. Now, if that is not ahead of its time, then I don't know what is. She attended Hunter College and Columbia University, yes, Columbia University, and she had 2 children with Edwin Rollins, whose sexuality is now known to be gay and who was also white. So she had a lavender marriage before it was even called that. And for my people who don't know what a lavender marriage is, that is when two people who are interested in the same sex, or two homosexual people, bisexual people, come together and they get married and have children and live a beautiful life. Married a white man, I kind of want to circle back to that because I love how I say you cannot put this woman in a box. She is really a pioneer for her time. A lot of scholars study her marrying a white man in relation to her work. However, I love that even with her relationships, she was like, y'all are not going to put me in a box. Yes, I am going to fight for rights for Black people and for people who are homosexual or lesbian, gay, LGBTQ. I'm going to fight for their rights as well. However, I'm going to marry who I want to marry based on who I love, based on who I have that emotional connection with. And I love her for that. Snaps for her because, yeah, girl, you go. Also want to add in that she is a breast cancer survivor as well. I've actually lost a cousin to breast cancer. I have a lot of breast cancer survivors in my family. And my grandfather, he actually passed away, not from breast cancer, but, from pancreatic cancer. And so I really sympathize with her for that. And her being a survivor makes me connect with her on a deeper level. I really feel as though this woman has done it all. She makes me feel like I have a lot left to do. Now, she does have an autobiography for those of you who would like to learn more about her. I have never read it, but I will definitely add it to my summer reading list as I love autobiographies and feel that you can learn a lot about life. Its ups, its downs, its hardships, all through reading about what successful people have gone through to get where they are as well. My most recent autobiographies have been Kerry Washington's and Jada Pinkett Smith's. Kerry's was a slow read for me, but it had really good points and it had really good moments that I connected with. I empathized with her and I saw myself within her, but I felt as though it was a slow read and it could have been written a little bit better. Jada's, however, was simply astonishing. It made me really fall in love with her as a person. I didn't know too much about Jada, being that I was born in 2000 and she was really popular when I was a young kid and before I was born. But me reading this book actually made me go watch her movies because it was just that good. I loved it. But I am getting off track, so let's get back to Audre Lorde and her autobiography. And if I pronounce this wrong, I apologize. I know that there is a saying that says if somebody pronounces something wrong, it is because they read it and they never heard it out loud. And I am one of those avid readers who learned new words from reading. So sometimes I will pronounce things wrong. So the autobiography is called Zami, a new spelling of my name. And so the book was described by its publishers as a biomythography, which combines elements of history, biography, and myth. And it is something that I myself do plan on reading and checking out. And I advise you to if you would like to learn more about her firsthand. She has a plethora of poems to check out as well, but we will focus on this one at hand. This poem I was introduced to during my creative writing poetry class at Northwestern State University, where I mentioned before I am obtaining my master's degree in English with a focus in creative writing. From the moment that I read this poem, I fell in love with it and simply wanted to share it with the world. So I will read it and then discuss some of my favorite parts and some questions I had and also just some random thoughts. And you can feel free to share yours as well within the comments. So this poem is called A Woman Speaks by Audre Lorde. Moon marked and touched by sun, my magic is unwritten. But when the sea turns back, it will leave my shape behind. I seek no favor, untouched by blood, unrelenting as the curse of love, permanent as my errors or my pride. I do not mix love with pity, nor hate with scorn. And if you would know me, look into the entrails of Uranus, where the restless oceans pound. I do not dwell within my birth, nor my divinities, who am ageless and have grown and still seeking. My sisters, witches in Dahomey, wear me inside their coil cloth as our mother did. I have been woman for a long time, Beware my smile. I am treacherous with old magic, in the noon's new fury, with all your wide futures promised. I am woman and not white. So this poem still takes me away. Honestly, I love the use of words and imagery within the poem. When she starts off by saying moon marked and touched by the sun, I automatically feel a softness in my heart because as a Black woman, you do not always hear of your complexion or your skin talked about in a manner that lifts it up in such an eloquently written way. It truly grabbed me in and it brought me into the poem, and I appreciate her for giving us women of color that. I truly do. I also love how she goes on to say that the sea will leave her shape behind. A lot of times in life, we kind of talk about what we will leave when we go. Will we matter? We're not all superstars, so our mortality is sometimes in question when we wonder if after a few generations, who will be there to know that we were here? That kind of reminds me of a Beyonce song that I love, I Was Here. I feel as though we're all trying to kind of leave a legacy for ourselves that, hey, we were here, whether it is for the world to see or whether it's just for our family to remember us. I know, like for me, that's why I keep diaries, I write books, poems, I create scrapbooks, cookbooks, all to leave to my family and to hopefully my future children, just so that they can remember that this is a part of mom and this is a part of our family and our legacy. And in that moment, I felt as though she was saying that she as a woman could not be erased, that she would not be forgotten, and that she was here. Not even the tide could take her. So then she goes on to say, I see no favor untouched by blood. And that part kind of confused me a little. I can admit when I'm reading a poem and I get taken aback because then I have to go over it again and again and again. And I understood the first part to basically say, I don't need you to tell me that I'm good, that I'm valuable, or that I'm the type of woman that I, quote, should be. It was the untouched by blood part that kind of threw me off. So I kind of want to know what you guys think about that. What did this give to you? Because I don't think she was just straight up talking about death. And I've heard before that it could have been sacrifice, but that is something that I would like to dive more into. Lines like unrelenting as the curse of love, permanent as my errors or my pride, show that she accepts herself fully. She loves her mistakes. None of these weaken her. They're permanent parts of her humanity and she won't apologize for them. I actually adore this because I know for me, I've had to grow out of that feeling that my mistakes were something that was working against me because they're not exactly who I am, but they help create who I am. And I cannot forget that. It's just part of my story. I love this quote. I forgot who it was made by, but I love this quote that says, when a woman loses her reputation, she learns what true freedom is. I think that it actually might be from a poem to a song by Lana Del Rey called Ride. She has a poem in the intro. If you've never heard Lana Del Rey Ride, pause me, log into YouTube right now if you're not already there and watch Lana Del Rey Ride. The intro poem is so beautiful. And like she said, when a woman loses who she is, when she loses her reputation, she learns what true freedom is. And she may have said it a little bit differently, but the message remains the same. Once you release the shackles of society and trying to fit into a box of what people want you to be and who you have to become to, so say, make you happy as a woman, that's when you start to just be happy with who you want to be as a person. And I do think that you have to do this with a grain of salt because to be successful in society, you do have to still conform to some things, but you shouldn't have to conform so much to where you look in the mirror and you don't even know who you are. You should still, work hard, go to work, do what you have to do, start a business, be successful. But at the root of it all, you should be who you are. And I hope that that is morally good, people. I'm going to move on to the next stanza, but altogether, I think this first stanza was her defining who she was as a woman, and that she would not change who she was for anybody, that she would never be forgotten, and that she is powerful, complex, and self-defined. I love that word, self-defined, self-definition. How would you define yourself, honestly? If you were to look in the mirror, or if you were to be writing down, this is who I am, how would you define yourself? And would others see you the same way? I know that if I was to define myself, I would probably say smart, beautiful, kind. But I know that there's some other words out there that can describe me for when I get a little bit upset, angry, maybe easily triggered. I'm very easily triggered by people that I love. I'm working on that. But I feel as though others would describe me in the same way. She's a nice girl. She's a great girl. Don't get her angry. To ask the question of, do you like how you are perceived by others? Do you like how others see you? Because if not, then do you even like how you see yourself? Do you like what you're putting out, what type of energy that you are putting out into the world? Because if not, then some changes have to be made. I don't like that people think I'm easily triggered, especially because it's only by the people that I love. And those are the type of people that I want them to know, like, it's always coming from a place of love. So for me, I'm trying to work on that. I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying to get into my poetry. I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure that the energy that I give to my loved ones and those who care for me are always good. And, I always like to say we're human. We're not perfect, and healing is not linear, and we weren't meant to be perfect. I think that in today's world with Instagram and all the social media, we put out this perfect persona, we put out this perfect image, and we think that healing should be perfect as well, but that is just not the case. That's not what it is, and that's just not human nature. You're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna mess up, but what's important is to just always come back to who you are, circle around what happened and what you did, and be like, okay, this is how I'm going to make it better. I'm not going to keep making the same exact mistakes over and over again. And if I fall back down, I'm going to get back up. I think that the second to last stanza focused on her heritage and where she is from as a woman of color. Although she is not an African American woman, she is a Black woman who was raised in America during a time of civil unrest, and she has always claimed herself to be Black. Therefore, her heritage is one that is true to her own, and it comes with its own set of experiences. She is West Indian. And although I do not know much about their history, I hope that this summer when I read her autobiography that I can learn more. I also really like the Witches in the Dahomey line. I'm from Louisiana, so I'm super spiritual. My family is from both New Orleans and the Cajun country area of Louisiana, known as the 337, and both areas are filled with different spirituality that tends to be mixed with Christianity, and so I felt a connection to her there when she said it in such an outright and straightforward way, because that is what people sometimes call what they don't understand. Similar to how healers in the Salem witch trials were tried due to them learning about nature and different ways of helping people that is not considered the European norm. So the last stanza starts off with her saying, I have been a woman for a long time. And I do not think she was just talking about herself. I feel as though she was talking about all the generations of women who had come before her. And that ties back to her saying before in the first stanza that she could not be forgotten. We are all pieces of our ancestors. The million pieces of them come together to make us. And they have walked this world before in similar ways to the way in which we walk this world now. There is nothing new under the sun. This is a quote that I truly believe in, because what happened before will happen again, just in different ways with different people. Human nature has never really changed, not at its core. And her last line really stood out to me when she said, and not white. And I think she said this because I really do feel as though Black women were often looked at as very masculine, and I don't know why, but we are. Well, actually, I do know why. I think it's because for years, Black women have had to be the head of the household. We've had to work, take care of the children, make sure the house was good, hold down our men who are going through so much in this world through being incarcerated, or the drugs that were going on, the gangs that was going on. And then when we do have a successful man, the world does tend to try to beat him down. So we have to be there for him too, and stand beside him and be Michelle Obama. We can't be average. We have to be Michelle Obama. So I think her saying this was saying, I'm just as much of a woman as they are. They really went hard on Serena for years. I remember they made up a rumor about Sierra when I was little. They really tried to make the black woman seem masculine. And so I think she was saying, no, just as frail as they are, I am too. Well, I won't say frail, but I'm a woman too, okay? I am a woman too. And I just want that to be seen. I want that to be known. And I want that to be heard. It for this segment of the poem written by Audre Lorde. And I honestly hope that you guys loved it. I did. If you want to read more of her work, just go to Google. Again, I did share her autobiography with you guys. I plan on ordering that. It is on my summer reading list, and I'll give a review of the book when I finish it. Now we're going to move on to our next segment, which is our short story reading. And I am super excited to read this short story. It is one of my favorite short stories in the whole wide world. I discovered this short story when I was attending Alabama State University as an undergrad, and in one of my classes we read it, and oh my gosh, I thought it was amazing. I feel as though her writing, even though it was written years ago, I feel as though it has a good way of imitating life in all its parts. It shows what women were doing and how they were getting through being in a box in society during the time period in which she lived in. She was born in 1850 and she passed away in 1904. So the way that women had to go about not fitting into a box at that time was much different than what was going on in Audre Lorde's time during the 70s. During that time period, women were pioneering going forward. But during the time period in which Kate Chopin lived in, if you were trying to pioneer, there was a good chance that you might be killed or just exiled from society, Time period. Being a widow was almost the best thing for a woman, because in that way they finally had freedom, and people are not looking at them, judging them, or expecting anything from them but to just be. She actually has another short story, which maybe in a couple of episodes we'll go back and cover after getting through a couple of other authors, that focuses on this in particular, where a woman is sad to find out that her husband is alive, because that means that she is not free. And that's sad, but that's how it was back then. So I love that her stories still have kind of longevity in terms of social standing, as far as like what happened back then still happens today, just in a different way. And I hope that I could recreate that with my stories, because it's why she's still so important. She was of Irish descent, and she moved to Louisiana when she was younger, where she really drew from the Creole heritage in the Acadiana area, which is where I am from. I'm actually from the 337, so I relate to her and I understood her completely. When you read this story and you see what everybody is getting into, I'm like, oh yeah, this is Louisiana. Everybody is married. Everybody is messing around. Everybody is doing a whole bunch of stuff that makes you be like, oh my gosh, I have to get out of this small town. But it's also so amazing. Our culture is so amazing. Our food, our family, the way we party, so I really understood everything that she was saying in this story. I related to it so much. So enough of me talking about all of this. Let me go ahead and read this story, and I hope that you guys enjoy it as much as I have. By Kate Chopin. Part 1. The leaves were so still that even Bibby thought it was going to rain. Bobin, who was accustomed to converse on terms of perfect equality with his little son, called the child's attention to certain sombre clouds that were rolling with sinister intention from the west, accompanied by a sullen, threatening roar. They were at Freidheimer's store. It decided to remain there until the storm had passed. They sat within the door on 2 empty kegs. Bibby was 4 years old and looked very wise. "Mama'll be afraid, yes?" he suggested with blinking eyes. "She'll shut the house. Maybe she got Sylvie helping her this evening," Bopin responded reassuringly. "No, she ain't got Sylvie. Sylvie was helping her yesterday," piped Bibby. Bopin arose and, going across to the counter, purchased a can of shrimps, of which Calixta was very fond. Then he returned to his perch on the keg and sat stolidly holding the can of shrimps while the storm burst. It shook the wooden store and seemed to be ripping gray furrows in the distant field. Bibby laid his little hand on his father's knee and was not afraid. Part 2. Calixta, at home, felt no uneasiness for their safety. At a side window, sewing furiously on a sewing machine. She was greatly occupied and did not notice the approaching storm. But she felt very warm and often stopped to mop her face, on which the perspiration gathered in beads. She unfastened her white sack at the throat. It began to grow dark, and suddenly, realizing the situation, she got up hurriedly and went about closing windows and doors. Out on the small front gallery, she had hung Bopin's Sunday clothes to dry, and she hastened out to gather them before the rain fell. As she stepped outside, Audre Lorde rode in at the gate. She had not seen him for very often since her marriage, and never alone. She stood there with Bopin's coat in her hand, and the big raindrops began to fall. Audre rode his horse under the shelter of a side projection where the chickens had huddled, and there were plows and harrows piled up in the corner. "May I come and wait on your gallery till the storm is over, Calixta?" he asked. "Come along in, Mr. Audre." His voice and her own startled her, as if from a trance, and she seized Bopin's vest. Audre, mounting to the porch, grabbed the trousers and snatched Bibby's braided jacket that was about to be carried away from a sudden gust of wind. He expressed an intention to remain outside, but it was soon apparent that he might as well have been out in the open. The water beat in upon the boards in driving sheets, and he went inside, closing the door after him. It was even necessary to put something beneath the door to keep the water out. "My, what a rain! It's good 2 years since it rained like that," exclaimed Calixta as she rolled up a piece of bagging and Audre helped her to thrust it beneath the crack. She was a little fuller of figure than 5 years before when she married, but she had lost nothing of her vivacity. Her blue eyes still retained their melting quality. Her hair, disheveled by the wind and rain, kinked more stubbornly than ever about her ears and temples. The rain beat upon the low shingled roof with a force and clatter that threatened to break an entrance and deluge them there. They were in the dining room, the sitting room, the general utility room. Adjoining was her bedroom, with Bibby's couch alongside her own. The door stood open, and the room with its white, monumental bed, its closed shutters, looked dim and mysterious. Audre flung himself into a rocker, and Calixta nervously began to gather up from the floor the lengths of a cotton sheet which she had been sewing. "If this keeps up, they said if the leaves go out to sand it," she exclaimed. "What have you got to do with the levees?" "I got enough to do, and there's Bopin with Bibby out in that storm if he only didn't let Freidheimers. Let us hope, Calixta, that Bopin's got sense enough to come in out of a cyclone." She went and stood at the window with a greatly disturbed look on her face. She wiped the frame that was clouded with moisture. It was stifling hot. Audre got up and joined her at the window, looking over her shoulder. The rain was coming down in sheets, obscuring the view of far-off cabins and enveloping the distant wood in a gray mist. The playing of the lighting was incessant. A bolt struck a tall chinaberry tree at the edge of the field. It filled all visible space with a blinding glare, and the crash seemed to invade the very boards they stood upon. Calixta put her hands to her eyes, and with a cry staggered backward. Audre's arms encircled her, and for an instant he drew her close, and spasmodically to him. "Bant!" she cried, releasing herself from his encircling arms and retreating from the window. "The house will go next. If I only knew where Bibby was." She would not compose herself. She would not be seated. Audre clasped her shoulders and looked into her face. The contact of her warm, palpitating body, when he had unthinkingly drawn her into his arms, had aroused all the old-time infatuation and desire for her flesh. He said, "Don't be frightened. Nothing can happen. The house is too low to be struck with so many tall trees standing about. There, aren't you going to be quiet? Say, aren't you?" He pushed her hair back from her face that was warm and steaming. Her lips was as red and moist as pomegranate seed. Her white neck and a glimpse of her full firm bosom disturbed him powerfully. As she glanced up at him, the fear in her liquid blue eyes had given place to a drowsy gleam that unconsciously betrayed a sensuous desire. He looked down into her eyes, and there was nothing for him to do but to gather her lips in a kiss. It reminded him of Assumption. "Do you remember Assumption, Calixta?" he asked in a low voice, broken by passion. Oh, she remembered. For an Assumption he had kissed her and kissed her and kissed her until his senses would well nigh fail, and to save her he would resort to a desperate flight. If she was not an immaculate dove in those days, she was still inviolate, a passionate creature whose very defenselessness had made her defense, against which his honor forbade him to prevail. Now her lips seemed in a manner free to be tasted, as well as her round white throat and her whiter breast. They did not heed the crashing torrents, and the roar of the elements made her laugh as she lay in his arms. She was revelation in that dim, mysterious chamber. As white as the couch she lay upon. Her firm, elastic flesh that was knowing for the first time its birthright was like a creamy lily that the sun invites to contribute its breath and perfume to the undying life of the world. The generous abundance of her passion, without guile or trickery, was like a white flame which penetrated and found response in depths of his own sensuous nature that had never yet been reached. When he touched her breasts, they gave themselves up in quivering ecstasy, inviting his lips. Her mouth was a fountain of delight, and when he possessed her, they seemed to swoon together at the very borderland of life's mystery. He stayed cushioned upon her, breathless, dazed, enervated, with his heart beating like a hammer upon her. With one hand she clasped his head, her lips lightly touching his forehead. The other hand stroked with a soothing rhythm his muscular shoulders. The growl of the thunder was distant and passing away. The rain beat softly upon the shingles, inviting them to drowsiness and sleep, but they dared not yield. Part 3. The rain was over, and the sun was turning the glistening green world into a palace of gems. Calixta, on the gallery, watched Alce ride away. He turned and smiled at her with a beaming face, and she lifted her pretty chin in the air and laughed aloud. Bopin and Bibi, trudging home, stopped without at the cistern to make themselves presentable. "My, Bibi, what'll your mama say? You ought to be ashamed. You ought to put on those good pants. Look at 'em. And that mud on your collar. How you got that mud on your collar, Bibi? I never saw such a boy." Bibi was the picture of pathetic resignation. Bopin was the embodiment of serious solicitude as he strove to remove from his own person and his son the sign of their tramp over heavy roads and through wet fields. He scraped the mud off Bibi's bare legs and feet with a stick and carefully removed all traces from his heavy brogans. Then, prepared for the worst, the meeting with an over-scrupulous housewife, they entered cautiously at the back door. Calixta was preparing supper. She had set the table and was dripping coffee at the hearth. She sprang up as they came in. "Oh, Bopin, you back? My, but I was uneasy. Where you been during the rain? And Bibi, he ain't wet, he ain't hurt?" She had clasped Bibi and was kissing him effusively. Bopin's explanations and apologies, which he had been composing all along the way, died on his lips as Calixta felt him to see if he were dry, and seemed to express nothing but satisfaction at their safe return. "I brought you some shrimps, Calixta," offered Bopin, hauling the can from his ample side pockets and laying it on the table. "Shrimps? Oh, Bopin, you too good for anything." And she gave him a smacking kiss on the cheek that resounded. "Divers repons, we'll have a feast tonight." Bopin and Bibi began to relax and enjoy themselves. And when the three seated themselves at the table, they laughed so much and so loud that anyone might have heard them as far away as Labilleries. Part 4. Alce Labillery wrote to his wife, Clarissa, that night. It was a loving letter, full of tender solicitude. He told her not to hurry back, but if she and the babies liked it at Biloxi, to stay a month longer. He was getting on nicely, and though he missed them, he was willing to bear the separation a while longer realizing that their health and pleasure were the first things to be considered. As for Clarice, she was charmed upon receiving her husband's letter. She and the babies were doing well. The society was agreeable. Many of her old friends and acquaintances were at the bay, and the first free breath since her marriage seemed to restore the pleasant liberty of her maiden days. Devoted as she was to her husband, their intimate conjugal life was something which she was more than willing to forego for a while. So the storm passed, and everyone was happy. Guys, so that is the story. I first want to apologize for any mistakes that may have happened when I was reading. I'm not the best out loud reader in the world. However, I do try, and I'm sorry if I've made any mistakes or mispronounced any words, but I hope that you guys still enjoyed the story. It still really got a deeper understanding of what was going on within the storm by Kate Chopin. So now let's talk about it. The reason I love this short story so much is because I really do think that this shows what Louisiana culture is all about. Even though this story was written in the 1800s, you still see so much of this today. Personal story, I was actually engaged to get married, and when I found myself thinking about other people or not really being infused within the marriage, I decided to not go through with it. However, there are so many men, especially in Louisiana where this story takes place, who get married, which I'm sure to women that at one point they loved or who they still love, yet they still miss their old days of being young and being a bachelor, and they still call you, they still text you, they still want to be with you. And I think that sometimes married life could just get a little bit old. It could get a little bit boring. It's not what everybody told us that it was going to be. It is a lot of work. So if you don't marry the right partner, which is very rare in this time period, because in this time period, you're not marrying just for love, you're marrying for provision. You're a woman, you don't have anything. So you have to really find the right person. And, in this story, it seemed as though her husband was very serious and that she was very serious, for the simple fact that he was afraid to come home after the storm because he thought she would be mad. He was surprised she was happy. He didn't know why she was happy, but he was surprised. I do think that this really does show kind of female sexual desire during this time, It seemed as though she really enjoyed herself. I think it's also funny how the wife Clarice, when her husband calls after having an affair, and it's like, oh, hey, if you want to stay gone a little longer, you stay gone a little longer. She's like, oh, baby, check the deuces to you. I wasn't even thinking about coming home. I am happy to be away. She's taken back to her debutante days. And I feel as though that's also something that a lot of us go through. I know I'm going through it right now. I'm 25 years old. I've just broken free of the yoke of childhood. And so now nostalgia is like getting to me. And I feel like that happens to a lot of us. We start to get into adulthood and the everyday lives of either being in a couple, either being married, either chasing your careers, either being in school, and you start to remember the old days. Do you remember when it was good like this? Do you remember when all of this happened? You start to remember your old loves. And I know I am bad for that. I am bad for looking back on the past and being like, wow, I miss how this was. But you have to remember that even when Lot's wife looked back, he turned into a pillar of salt, okay? Now, in this book, this short story, everybody tended to be happy at the end because everybody was just doing their own thing. And I guess you could see that as a good thing or a morally corrupt and bad thing, but that's just human nature, and that's how human nature kind of is. You see these couples who have been married for years. We could look at Jada and Will Smith. We see these couples who end up in open relationships because they've been married for years and they get tired of each other, but they're not going to break the marriage because sometimes it's just not what people want to do. And sometimes when you have built a life together, it's not that easy to just walk away and say goodbye. So I love this story. I really feel as though even though it was written in the 1800s, it relates to a lot of love, desire, and things that happen again today. And I think it shows how when given the opportunity, when nature gave them an opportunity of freedom, they jumped at it. When they finally got that chance, they jumped at it. And I wonder if is that how humans really are? When we get the chance, Do we go? Do we put our hand in the cookie jar? Do we take that chance? And I feel as though a lot of people do. So that is a wrap on the K. Chopin story, The Storm. Tell me what you guys think about it. Who were the characters that really stood out to you? What do you think about this theme? And does this relate to where you are in life at the moment? Before I close out with you guys, I would like to leave you guys with a short poem that I have written recently. And I would also like to leave you guys with a quote to end the session with. So the short poem is actually on my Instagram page, Write Your Page with Paige, that I've told you guys about. All my poetry is on there if you ever would like to go and just immerse yourself into my writing. So this poem is called I Cut My Hair Off. And it goes, I cut my hair off and I dyed it a new color. I love chasing the feeling of always starting over. Beauty to me is so serene. I love who I am, and that's always changing. I'm an open book, but the genre is mystery. And so this poem I wrote because I actually did cut all my hair off and went for like this Eva model look, blonde hair, everything. And I love it. And I love that it represents a shift in my life. I'm going through a lot of changes right now. I'm entering a new era, a new chapter of adulthood, and just a new chapter of being me. And I genuinely love it. I have a tattoo that reads change is inevitable because change is always happening. That's just what it is. And so for me, I just find it to be beautiful and I find it to be rewarding. I find it to be new. And I also say that, yes, I am an open book because I'm a Gemini. I don't hold any secrets. What you see is what you get. However, the genre is mystery because even I don't know what I'm going to do next. Even I don't know how this story is going to end. So it doesn't matter what you know. My next move will never, ever be predictable. So the quote that I would like to leave you with is a quote by Laozi. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. And I love this quote because it brings us back to what we were talking about when we were talking about Audre Lorde and self-definition. You know, it all starts with you. So I hope that you enjoyed this first podcast. I'll be dropping a podcast every month of a poem and a short story and me breaking it down. I hope that you enjoyed it and I hope that you subscribe. Again, you can go to my Instagram, Write Your Page with Paige, and watch the visual on YouTube. I hope that you guys have an amazing rest of your day, night, week, month, and year.